let's talk about something that we seem to talk about daily in this market, and that is
Not interest rates, please.
no interest rates.
Okay.
Interest rates, by the way, this is shot around Thanksgiving time, and interest rates actually last night I saw tick down to 7.35, down from 8. We're not talking about interest rates though, but 7.35 is a great number when we were looking at 8s, right? Still a big meeting for the Fed on that, but really want to talk about housing predictions for 2024. And that, of course, is around house prices, right? Seems like every single person we talk to has some opinion on, is it a good time to buy based on, is there a collapse coming, this economic collapse? And funny enough, there has been some big names that have talked about this. Morgan Stanley dropped a report yesterday. And then, of course, a lot of people came behind that, Goldman Sachs. And when I talk about my predictions of 2024, I pay attention to what these large companies are doing, right? Like, if you're not following Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs when it's talking about money and things like that, your opinion doesn't really matter against those two companies, in my opinion, right? Like, this is their job. They have thousands of employees that are looking at this data every day and trying to figure it out. And a consensus from this report is that they're going to go tick up maybe slightly or stay flat. There was only one major player that said, okay, they're going to go down by 2.1%, right? So very interesting.
Well, I definitely think that if you are seeing the interest rates start to tick down, that's a good indication of what's going to happen with prices next year.
Right.
Not that there's a guarantee, but I definitely think that if we start to see those interest rates go down, a lot of people are predicting that they're not going to go down to, we're not going to see a 5 till the end of 2024.
Yeah.
And yet I think
if we see a 5,
if we see a 5,
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And 6 is a great number. And I think the important thing that we talk about with our team often is, like, if you're waiting for those prices to come down, you could be waiting a very, very long time.
Well, I don't think prices are coming down. They're just not coming down. They might not be going up like they were over the last few years, but and I do think, depending on where you are, we may have seen a slight decrease in prices. But I think people feel like it's a decrease because it's not going up by 5%, 10% every time something new comes onto their...
Why can't it go up by 20%?
Well, every time something goes on the market in their neighborhood for a while, it was going up incrementally, right? Yeah. And so I think when you're not seeing those incremental increases, it feels like a decline when it's really not.
Right. Oh, my house only sold for $5,000 more than my neighbor. It's like,
right.
That's still setting... I thought about this last night, right? Like, we were in a market where it took 100 days on market, right? Like, we have sold real estate when it wasn't just put it on 10 offers, sort through them, which one's cash, what one's over, right? Like, when it was 100 offers, we were, as a team, we were still able to look at a property and get it ready to go on market and still break the neighborhood record.
Right.
And now people are like, well, if you didn't break it by like $50,000, it's not a broken record. It's like, well, what happened to the days when...
Or it wasn't a good offer.
Right. Like, what happens to the days when, like, we got you more money than your neighbor, and that's a win?
Right.
Now it's like, well, if I don't get this huge number, it's not a win.
I think going back to 2024, the question becomes, what is the temperature of the buyers? So do we think that when we start seeing a 6, that buyers come back? What do you think buyers are waiting for? What's the magic number?
I don't think... I think it's a combination of a lot of things. I think anybody who, and that's why I wanted to touch on this topic, I think anybody who is waiting for the median house price to come down, like a collapse in the real estate industry.
They're just consistently waiting.
You're just a doomsdayer, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're
never going to buy a house.
This is actually directed at you. And I think for buyers, it's interest rate really dependent, right? Like, I don't see a way around that, right? Like,
so
If you're motivated to buy a house and it's gone up incrementally, $5,000 or $10,000, you're like, okay, it's stabilizing. And if I can get the interest rate down where I feel comfortable to lock that in for 7 to 10 years, I become very comfortable. Oh, and by the way, like my house that I may be living in that I'm looking to move up or move down also sells very quickly. And so I can eliminate that.
So I think about this from an investor standpoint, which I know you are as well. I just feel like I'd rather go ahead and buy something now where I know where the prices are, because I do believe as soon as the interest rates really start to come down, then prices are going to go back up because the demand is going to be back. And I would rather go ahead and purchase something now and then refinance when the rates come down than have to fight that battle once we go back to in the fives, because that will happen. It's just a matter of when. It may not be 2024.
Or 25. I mean,
I believe it will be.
I think the American population is conditioned to a 5 when we were conditioned to a 6 for a very long time, right?
But what happens when it gets to 5 now?
Oh, it's going to be bonkers, right? Like it just won't make sense again. Interesting enough, too, like I was reading a report about the institutional buyers, right? Like so this is considered an investor that owns more than 100 doors, right? So institutional buyer, that's what we call iBuyer. They were up to about 2.5% last year at this time of total purchases across the U.S., and that's dropped now to like 0.5%. It's pretty interesting that institutional buyer, because of interest rates, has slowed down, right? Because you would think like if money is no object and everybody else is pausing, I would flood the market.
Right.
And yet they're not, except for like Cleveland, Ohio. Ohio is like a hotspot where they're buying like 10% of all homes sold right now. So it's very interesting how these conglomerates are looking at the heat charts, right? And like, oh, well, I can, for whatever reason, maybe the rent hasn't adjusted, right?
Yeah.
Zillow was one of the people mentioned in this report of 2024 home forecasts. 6 months ago, they were at 6%. October 30th, they were at 2.5% growth. And then yesterday, they basically got ahead of it and said, we're going to see it flatline. So Zillow, who is arguably like has a very close pulse on the market and what's happening in the data, says it's going to be flat. And what they're seeing in the rental market, which is always interesting, is concessions starting. So move into this apartment, we'll give you the first month free. Mm-hmm. Move in, and if you're in a big city, we'll include your parking for free because you normally have to pay for it or something like that, right? It tends to be in big cities, but it's interesting to see how I think it's related to new construction of this multifamily that's been
absolutely
this wave that's coming, and all of a sudden now they got to start
filling them.
Right. I mean, we're seeing that locally.
How
crazy it is to like just every time you turn around, there's a new apartment complex coming up that's 6 stories, 10 stories, three buildings, right?
So what does that do to the individual investor?
Well, to the individual investor, it's interesting, right? Like you better have a really clean property with some sort of wow factor. I was thinking about that too, right? Like if you could move into this beautiful brand new apartment complex that has a gym and
amenity rich
pickleball courts and tennis courts and a pool,
pickleball,
and it's all brand new. And it's got a convenient location. If I'm an investor right now, it's like, wow, could be a little challenging to rent my fourplex.
What that doesn't touch is higher end investments. What do you think about that?
Interesting, right? I think there's always been a short of high end investment opportunities, right?
You were just looking for one with clients, right?
Yeah, like a trophy property, as we would call it, right? Something that's kind of a wow factor. So, I don't know. It's very interesting. 2024, all of the big players are saying we're going to see a slight tick up. Interest rates are headed in the right direction. I really wanted to talk to some of our people about, like, if you're waiting for this to come down, I don't think that's necessarily the intelligent move. If all of the big players are saying it's going to tick up, why would you wait?
I think it's just an individual comfort zone. And even though you can have all the data in the world suggesting one thing, there's always going to be people who are on the other side of that.
Right. opinions.
I
mean, 2016, 2018, right? Everybody was like, oh, the economy is going to collapse. We've been in a bull market now for 10 years. You can't be in a bull market for longer than 10 years. And it didn't happen, and it didn't happen, it didn't happen. So very interesting.